Thanks everybody for joining us for a new webinar today. We're really excited today. We have a very special guest. A lot of you already connected, came early. We're a bit late. Thanks for waiting for us. We're just dealing with a few technical issues, but everything is running smooth now, and we're really excited to welcome our guest. Thanks everybody. I see familiar faces. I see Pat again, Moko, Matthew, a lot of people from all around the world. I hope you all staying safe at home. And we're here for about an hour to answer a maximum of your questions. Feel free to ask some questions for our amazing guest. We honor and proud to welcome producer and mixer Bob Clearmountain today. Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. How are you? Welcome, everyone. All right. So I got a bunch of questions here that I will go through and see if I can come up with some clever answers. The first one is from Sarmad Kafour. Was there ever a time you weren't happy with your mixes? How'd you deal with it? I'm usually not happy with my mixes. Are you kidding? Well, really, it's up to the person I'm mixing with. It's up to the producer and the artist. I mean, sometimes I will be happy and they won't. But sometimes it's the other way around where I won't be happy, but they like it. And so it's really, I kind of let them decide. That's how I deal with it. Here's one, all information for when the material, I don't understand that one. Hi, Bob. I remember you saying line 6 pod was the most unmixable sound. Well, that was a long time ago, and I haven't come across that sound in a long time. So it was a big problem. I don't know why, but it just would never work in a mix at the time, the line 6 pod device. Here's one from Sam Lowe. Hi, Bob. Do you mix your vocals through a separate stereo bus from the rest of the arrangement to keep your vocals from triggering the mix brush compression? No, I don't at all. Because I think that's part of the nice thing that bus compression does, is that it actually, the rest of the mix, if you really, the vocal's really poking out, it'll sort of duck the rest of the mix. But I do that with, I have a side chain on the mix bus compressor that I EQ, so I roll off some, I do like a high pass filter on the side chain so that the bass drum doesn't hit it too hard. Because sometimes, sometimes you want to crank the bass drum, but you don't want that to make the whole mix go away. So that helps with that a little bit. Let's see. Do you use different parallel? Oh no, that was the same question. Sorry. Hello, Bob. What's your approach? This is from. What's your approach when you start a mix? Well, basically, I start from a rough mix. I mean, it's usually my assistant sets something up on the board because he's kind of set up the Pro Tools session, and he'll just shove all the faders up in a line, and I'll start from that, start playing with it, and then I'll go through and solo each instrument. I'm always trying to find out what the contribution of each instrument or vocal is to the mix or to the story of the narrative of the song, and kind of familiarize, because it's usually something that I haven't mixed before because I don't really produce anymore. And so I'll do that for a while, and then it'll just gradually morph into making things sound better. I mean, I don't sit there and start with the drums. I usually don't, practically never start with the drums. The only time I start with the drums, if it's something that I know really well, if I know the song and I know the music, and so there's no sort of discovery really. It's just a matter of how I got to get this to sound good. But normally, I'll just play around with different things, pan things quite a bit. Where's this guitar going to be? Where's that keyboard going to be? Things like that. If it's a live album, I kind of work on the audience. The audience is extremely important, the audience mics, which is something that I want to emphasize here, that I've been mixing a couple projects, one in particular where things are recorded by the front of house guy nowadays, and nobody can afford to get a big recording truck, and you can do it on your Pro Tools venue system or whatever. It's pretty easy to do. But so this one guy, the recordings are so good. He's really good because everything sounds fantastic. But one pair of audience mics, and it sounds like they're aimed right at the PA. So I'm basically getting his mix and very little audience, and this is a big problem, especially because most of these things get mixed in surround, and it's nice to have a couple mics in the back, a couple mics in the side, some audience mics in the front, and I mean, so many of these shows that the real professional shows that I've mixed, like for the Stones and Springsteen and people like that, there's usually like 12 to 16 audience mics, and they're placed all around the room and separated fairly far from each other, so there isn't any phase problem between the mics. And but I'm kind of off the track of the questions, but this is something that's been on my mind quite a bit, that people just don't understand how important the audience mics are. And you're recording the audience, and a lot of times it's labeled ambience. Well, okay, that's part of it, but what they're really there for is to actually get the audience reaction. It's so important. And so you don't want to face the mics towards the PA, right? I don't need that. What I need is they should be faced away from the PA as much as possible towards the audience, and not too close, because you get that one guy clapping, which luckily there's a program by a company called Isotope, which will get rid of that pretty easily, but shouldn't have to do that. Okay, anyway, so I've gotten off the track. Let's answer some more questions. A lot of these are just comments, which is nice. Oh, that was the next question. When mixing live albums, do you get tracks with no ambience crowds? Yeah, that's a real problem. And once in a while, and you have to fake the whole thing. I mean, this one I was talking about, I have to do a lot of faking just because there isn't enough of the audience recorded. And I've told the artist several times, I said, look, man, tell your front house guy, more mics. So yeah, that can be a problem when you end up having to fake it. And luckily I have a vault full of live performances in all types of different audiences, stadiums and arenas and theaters, and that I can pull from that we can kind of fake it. Let's see, do you and how do you fake live field in studio live? Do you clean gate instruments to aid separation, or just let it bleed? I love the little Stones reference there. Well, sometimes, I mean, sometimes you kind of, the ambience works. I mean, like with Springsteen, he stands right in front of his couple of Marshalls that are right behind him, and so you get a lot of bleed from his guitars, which makes his guitar sound pretty harsh. And so I'll do a lot of fader rides, every time he's, and sometimes I'll just go into Pro Tools and chop it out. And sometimes that's actually easier. But a lot of times I just like to do it because it's fun. And I'll just write it down every time he's not singing, and then write it back up. And as long as I have a video to look at, it's pretty easy to do because I can see where he's coming up. If there's no video, then I'll usually do it in Pro Tools. Let me see. I love this is from Boring Sim. Love your mix on the live version of Western Stars. Regarding to that, what's your approach to piezo pickup recorded acoustic guitars? I find it hard to give back some of that. Yeah, absolutely. Every now and then I'll come across an acoustic guitar that actually sounds good out of the plug-in, the piezo, however that they're doing it. Jackson Brown has an amazing thing. He spent years taking acoustic guitars apart and placing mics in different places. His sounds outrageously good, but most of them don't. I hate to say it. Those Ovation ones usually sound pretty awful, and most of them sound pretty bad, actually. But there's I think Taylor makes one that sounds very good, and there's a few others. But yeah, it's a real problem. It'd be nice if somebody could come up with a plugin that would turn that into something that actually sounded like a real mic'd acoustic guitar. You know, I haven't found that yet. Let's see, Tin Drum. Huge fan of your work, especially mixes on drums. Okay, can't stand the Rosillos. Wow, that's a throwback. Sean Colvin, that's nice. Where do you stand on drum sample replacement and triggering? Any drum EQ tips? I very often augment the bass, whatever bass drum is there, with a sample, because I have some very nice samples that I've found and recorded, just to give it a little more punch and more definition and more, so that it mixes better with the bass. I mean, bass drums are one of the hardest things to record, I think, compared to the rest of the drums, which are generally pretty simple. And it's hard to get I mean, I've had to add samples to my own recordings to the bass drum. So there you go. I try not to add samples to the snare drum, because sometimes you can hear it if it sounds like a sample. On like bass drum, it usually won't sound like, you won't be able to tell that it's a sample. But snare drum is tricky, especially on fills and rolls and things like that. I use a thing called Dramagogue, which works pretty well because you can put two samples in, a left and a right hand. So when there's a fill, it doesn't sound like a machine. And then it's very good at tracking the dynamics. You put different samples in for, different velocities. But it's you got to be so careful with it. And if I can avoid it, I do. I try not to do that. Hi, Bob. There's Herney Mix. Hi, Bob. After listening to Bryan Adams' Reckless for the first time, I realized I want to become an engineer. So thank you so much. Oh, well, you're so welcome. That's just a nice thing that somebody said. Can you talk a little about your experience during the Power Station years, and how did you achieve the drum and vocal sound on that record? I'd love to talk about it, but I didn't do anything special. That's for sure. Back then, I tell you what, I never really thought about special microphones. I mean, we used U87s because we had lots of them, and sometimes we'd use a Shure 58 on the vocal if it was a real rock track and we wanted a sort of a nastier sound on his vocal. And as far as guitars, we're just let's see, Keith I think had a Marshall or something like that. We used those little Fender amps. Nothing real special, It's just a matter of how you use it in a mix, I think. And let's see. You're processing, rooting, and this is from Eat Sleep Drums. Processing, rooting, layering of effects is fascinating. Can you talk about what helps make your effects sound so live and exciting? Well, it's funny that you should mention that, because I have this whole chain of effects that I use, which are it's a combination of digital delays and reverbs, digital reverbs, some my live chamber, which I have here at my studio, and I use what's it called, Altiverb for reverbs, and I have a few of my own impulse responses for my chambers, and the Apogee Studio, which I use quite a bit. But this is why I came up with this Clearmountain's Domain plugin, because it was really hard to duplicate that kind of effects chain in a computer. Like if you were mixing in the box, it's very hard to do. I mean, I did it with, here you can see, I don't know if you can see over there, that patch bay. Yeah, it's like a mess. It's like a bunch of spaghetti. So it's a lot of patch cords and a lot of stuff that's returns from the console. The returns are over there. And then I send delays into harmonizers and into reverbs and EQ them, do all kinds of weird stuff to them, which is really simple to do here on the big hunk of metal behind me. But in the box, it's a little tricky. And so my former assistant, Sergio Ruelas, who mixes in the box. He mixes in Logic and Pro Tools. He said, it'd be great if there was some way we could come up with a plugin that would do all this. And okay. Apogee, of course, my wife's company is Apogee Electronics, and they were just starting to do plugins at the time. And we were thinking about this. And I went to her and she said, yeah, if you could do it, that'd be great. We could maybe, if we could do it, we could sell it as a plugin. And so we did. And it ended up being, we spent a couple of years working on it. Ended up being Clearmountain's Domain. We're going to have another version coming out in, probably several months, probably the end of the summer or something like that, with some improvements. And Brandon here, who is my assistant today, he actually assisted me for years before Sergio, and also takes care of the Apogee studio. He's been sort of working on sort of kind of a new look for it, and I've been adding some improvements, and we'll see how that goes. But anyway, so everybody go out and check it out, because it's really, and even if you don't really use it, it's really fun to play with, because you can come up with this it's like an infinite number of effects and sounds and different combinations of sounds that you can do with it. It's really fun. The Spectra sessions. Bob, thanks so much. Does starting a mix in mono have any advantages? It might have advantages. I usually don't do that, because I'm a real stereo guy. And so I like stereo. Putting things left and right helps me sort out what's in the project, what the elements are. So no, but sometimes I end up in mono. I mean, there have been, I've finished mixes and then so, gee, I wonder what this sounds like in mono, and I go, oh, that's pretty cool, And so occasionally that happens. I'm not totally against mono. I'm not totally against mono. Okay, let's see. Here's Emil Shayeb. Hello, Bob. Thanks for doing this. When will we see you deconstruct a mix? I don't know. Maybe someday. Maybe when I come over and do the mix with the masters, we could do that. That's a possibility. What have been your most challenging mix, and why? Greetings from Spain. This is from Connor Wallace. Let me see. There's been a couple. One of my most challenging mixes was a thing by Brian Ferry called Slave to Love. In fact, that whole album was really hard to do. Slave to Love, I think I remixed it 5 or 6 times in 3 different studios. Power Station, Electric Lady, and Air in London. And that was difficult. There's been, let me see. I can tell you that probably about the easiest mix I ever did was the entire Born in the USA album for Bruce Springsteen, because that band is so amazing. They kind of balance themselves. So it's a matter of just getting a balance, and there weren't even that many rides. They're pretty incredible, those guys. I love them. How do you create space in a mix? Okay, once again, back to the Clearmountain's Domain plugin will help you create space. And not only that, but there's a lot of other things, not just the effects. I mean, you can create space. First of all, just figure out what, a lot of times frequencies conflict with each other. Getting a balance, it isn't just levels, it's equalization as well. And, a lot of times I tell this to a lot of people, and I'm sure you probably heard this before even. You trying to figure out why you can't hear the bass. So, geez, the bass sounds so muddy, and you go to EQ it and you solo it and you go, oh, well, that sounds pretty good. And then you put it in the mix and go, God, it just kind of disappears, Well, then go through, turn the bass off, and go through and listen to all the other instruments. And sometimes you'll find like a keyboard that's got this big bottom end, or even some guitars or something like that, or maybe even vocals that have some bottom end that's just conflicting. So a lot of times you don't even need it, especially some keyboards, like a lot of presets on digital keyboards will have this big sound, because when they developed the um, the patch, they were just listening to that. They weren't really listening to it in a mix. And you just roll some of that out, and you still get the character of the patch, but now all of a sudden, oh, there's the bass. All of a sudden, the bass just appears because there's nothing getting in the way of it. I mean that's one way of clearing space. You're always trying to move things away from the vocal range. If you got vocals in there, you want to make sure nothing's challenging that sound, that the timbre of the voice, unless, except in the breaks when there's nobody singing, then that stuff can come up. And so there's a lot of balance. There's a lot of it is just writing things to keep out of the way of other things. Figure out what the important things are. What are the hooks? What's the vocals? Usually the most important thing, and then there'll be guitar lines or something playing a melody, and just make sure that there's nothing in the way of that EQ wise, sound wise. And that, I mean, I don't know how to get much more specific than that. It all depends on the piece of music you're working on. It's a good question though, from Michael. I can't pronounce your last name. Sorry, Digenis. You know what? I'm going to scroll down to see if there's some newer questions. I don't know what that means. Hi, Bob. Okay, here's from Jesper Malling. Hi, Bob. What is your most important tool when mixing besides your ears? And also, what is your favorite instrument to mix? My favorite tool is that hunk of metal behind me. I love that. That's one thing. The Apogee converters are a really important part of what I do, because I have like 80 D to A channels, I think, coming off my multi-track rig, and if they don't sound good, there's nothing I could do with that to actually get it to sound right. And so that's really important. I'm so grateful that Apogee came along. I mean, I hated digital when it just came out, and I just didn't want to know from it. And then I came across an Apogee converter. I went, oh, well, okay. Well, now it's actually starting to sound good. And not many people know this, but Apogee was the first ones to figure out why digital sounded bad. I mean, they had a brilliant engineer who was a friend of my wife Betty's, a guy named Christoph Heidelberger, and he realized that the original digital converters designed by, I think, Sony and Philips and a few companies, that they had these brick wall anti-aliasing filters right at 22K in the audio range for a 44.1 K sample rate or 48K sample rate. And he realized that it didn't have to be a brick wall, that the brick wall was actually causing ringing down into the audio spectrum. And that's why digital was harsh. It wasn't anything to do with really the sample rate, or it was really the filter, the shape of the filter. And so he realized that if you contour that a bit, and that's when all of a sudden, oh, digital is we can use it now. And then all the other companies copied Apogee. They looked at what they were doing, and I think they changed it slightly so they wouldn't get in trouble. And in fact, Sony came to Apogee and said, "Look, could you help us with our filters?" Because they were making these digital multi-tracks. But anyway, so that's one thing. Let me see Pultecs. My Pultec EQs. I wonder if I can turn this around. Those things, the greatest equalizer ever designed, and they were designed way back in the 60s by a guy in New Jersey, and they're still made by Pulse Techniques. A guy named Steve Jackson makes them. The top two are the reissues actually, and they're absolutely identical to the bottom three. The third and fourth ones were gifts from Bryan Adams, which is really nice. And they're the original ones. And then the bottom one, I don't remember where I got that. That's actually a new Vista one. It doesn't have tubes in it. The rest of them have tubes. But I like the bottom one, which is actually broken, it turns out, because Apogee was modeling them. And they modeled that one, and they said, something wrong with that, and it's distorted. I go, well, that's interesting, because that's what I have it on my snare drum all the time. And so I guess it's sort of adding to the snare drum sound a little bit. But I think we might actually, Apogee might put that out as a special version of the EQP 1A3. I don't know. I'd love to hear from you guys if that would be interesting to anyone, because we've been debating about whether or not to do that. Here's wait a minute. Here's someone in Woodstock, great, which is where I actually have a home in Woodstock. Pete Hanlon. I spotted you at Levon's Barn from time to time. Cool. What's your favorite restaurant in town? Great. My favorite restaurant in town is actually the Rose Cafe, I think. I love that place. And of course, the Bear Cafe is an old favorite. Yeah, it's about it. The Rose. There's a few others. There's some good ones. It's a great town for food. Any tips for piano vocals recorded at the same time? Ethan Grushka. Well, I didn't record that, so I don't know. I mean, that was a tricky thing to mix because it's an open upright piano with I think it's like a piece of felt or something between the hammers and the strings, which gives it that real muffled, dark, incredibly dark sound. And so the piano's not very loud, and the front of it's open, and Ethan is singing into a mic, and he's singing into the piano. So there was a whole lot of leakage between his voice and the piano, and there was some phase issues. It was really difficult to mix. And so I would not do it that way, even though my friend Tony Berg did it, and it just ended up sounding fantastic. But it's probably a good thing he did it, because I would have put all kinds of things in between, and it probably wouldn't have sounded as good. It would have been easier to mix, but it probably wouldn't have sounded as good. So some people are better at recording because they don't think too technically. Anyway, and Len Krasinski. Bob, can you shed any light on female vocal, especially the 5K? Yeah, it can be a problem. In fact, I have a device over there, one of my racks, called a BSS dynamic equalizer. And there's some things, there's some devices that do this as plugins as well. But it's basically, it's an equalizer, but each band, it's a 4-band equalizer, but each band is also a compressor. And so you find the frequency, you kind of boost the frequency that's harsh in that voice, and then turn the thing the other way to dip, and then set the threshold so it only reacts when that gets to be a problem, when that sound gets to be a problem. So normally it's not doing anything. And then every time the vocalist hits one of those, like, ooh, man, that hurts, then it kind of just ducks it out a little bit. And I've been quoted as saying it's almost like cheating, because it's an amazing tool to use. And unfortunately, I think I had 3 of them, and I just have one that works still. These old pieces of gear unfortunately die. Let's see. Okay, Milterson. Hi, Bob. I will try to throw a philosophical question at you. I like those. Do you have a visual image of the mix in your head while mixing? And if so, can you explain how it looks in terms of placement, space? Well, yeah. I mean, that's something that I think about a lot, actually. That's a really good question. Because I do think of it very visually, because it's probably because I mix so much live stuff. And so it's always, there's backing, like this thing I'm mixing now for Stevie Van Zandt, which is, as you can see that behind me. Oops. Looks a little, it's a little washed out. Unfortunately, he just had this live shot of this one song, and it's a big wide shot. And so there's backing vocals over on the right, and there's the horn sections on the left, and Mark, the guitar player, is on the left, and let's see, Banana, the piano player, is on the right, and the percussion is way over on the left. So I kind of mix it that way. I mean, instead of spreading the backing vocals stereo left and right and the horns left and right, I actually mix what I'm seeing. And so I tend to do that with studio records too, because I'll put all the backing vocals on one side, especially if there's also horns or something that can balance them off kind of somewhat equally on the other side. And so I kind of like to have things balanced somehow, and they don't have to be balanced necessarily at the same time. I mean, it could be one thing stronger in the verse and then something on the other side stronger in the chorus, let's say. It's not limited by a time frame or a section of the piece of music. And so kind of that, I look at that very much. Usually the vocals center, drums are normally center. I mean, once in a while you do something, you have some kind of quirky piece of music where I'll put the whole rhythm section on one side and the vocals on the other. I got into trouble with that one time with a band called Delamitri, and they had a song called Roll to Me. And I did that just I think in the verses, the vocals were on the right and the band was on the left or something like that. And I think in the choruses, it all went to normal stereo, just some tricky thing like that. I was just having fun because I thought it was, I really thought it was a throwaway track. In fact, the band thought it was a throwaway track, that it was just on the B-side of the album. And it was just this fun little song. And it turned out that was the single. And so I got a call from the band in Canada. They were touring Canada and they were listening to the radio, and the thing became a hit. So it came on the radio. But some of these stations out in the middle of nowhere, they don't really think about stereo or, technically they don't really have it quite together. And so they were only getting like the left channel. And so part of the songs, they were missing half the music. And so they called me and they said, look, any chance you could get in there and do just a normal stereo mix of the whole thing just to send to these dopey radio stations? Yeah, okay. Luckily, it was the studio's in my house, so I just went downstairs and quickly, pulled it up and did a real quick mix the same day, and sent it off. And they just sent that copy out to radio stations. So yeah, it's interesting. Just think, I have so many memories of each album. This is from Taylor Del Seba. I can't pronounce your name. Sorry, Rabin, maybe. I don't know. Sorry if I'm totally butchering your name. You try my real last name is Chiaramonte. Good luck with that one and spelling it. That's why I translated it to Clearmountain. Just thank you. I have so many memories of each album. I remember Mediate by INXS. What could you tell us about that experience? Well, that's fascinating, that song, because I had to start with rough mixes that Chris Thomas, the producer, had done in Australia. And so he said, look, just put up recall my rough mix, because they had done it on an SSL, on a G series. Okay, so I put it up, and the entire mix was going through, he had one of the aux sends pretty much turned all the way up, going into a with some kind of device. It was either a symphonic, it might have been a harmonizer with a pitch shift on one side and a delay on the other side, or something like that. I forgot exactly what the effect was, but the entire mix is going through that off an aux send, and that's why it sounds like that. The whole thing is going through this weird stereo, sort of a chorusing type sound. And so Chris went and said, oh, what's this? Oh, we should turn that down. Why is that so cranked? I said, no, man, you don't want to touch that, because there was all this compression besides. And so we tried turning it down on one of the synthesizers, and it all of a sudden the entire mix changed radically. So I'd love to take total credit for that, but mostly that was something that Chris Thomas did without even knowing what he was doing, and which I kept, and then I kind of built the rest of the mix around that. So that was a wacky thing. I just saw something about from Mohit Ahuja. Once again, I'm sorry for destroying your name. Would love your insight on owning an SSL in 2020. I'm looking at the 4K, but these days 9Ks are reaching that price now. Well, mine's still running, and I just love it. I mean, I really do. I mean, I've been mixing on basically the same console. You know, the E series wasn't that much different than the G, and we had the first. I was in on ordering the very first E series in the United States at Power Station, and so I've been back in those days. I was kind of part of the development of the software as well, because we'd have meetings every couple of years, and we kept giving them our 2 cents, and they would listen. So the computer it's still the best mixing automation on the planet, even though it's got a bunch of flaws, which I would love if somebody would come along and fix them. That'd be great. But nobody knows the code. It's all written in machine code. I think it's some kind of proprietary thing. And a few companies have tried to port it over to Macs or PCs, but nobody's had any luck doing it yet. But it's just so musical, and it's one of those things where you can just ride stuff and you don't think about the automation really. It's just there. It's like playing an instrument almost, and I just love it. And you know, I can rewind and drop in, and I can work on one channel, I can work on a lot of channels, and it's just a lot of riding, and it's just so much fun and easy to use. It controls it actually locates and controls where you are in the mix. So you just go, okay, go do mix at C1, and there you are playing chorus 1. It does so many great things. And not only that, but you can either have moving faders or not with the automation system. Although I always keep the moving faders off, because my theory is that the fader's going to move, I'm going to be the one moving it. I don't really like when the faders are moving by themselves. And so I much prefer the VCA mode, plus the fact that most of them don't really work on this one. But the VCAs work great, and they sound great. Will you do mixes? Okay, David Coate, would you do mixes in the box? I have done a couple, but not for commercial release. And yeah, I have an opinion about that. There's a big question about whether mixing in the box sounds worse or better than mixing in a console, and I don't know. I actually don't know. You know, I've done some mixes I thought sounded pretty good with I only use Apogee plugins, of course, except for a couple of other things. But I've gotten some pretty great sounding mixes, to be honest. And the thing is that for me, growing up on that thing, it's kind of torture. You know, it really is. You know, opening little windows and having to, you know, every time I want to EQ something, to have to open an EQ window, and instead of on this thing, I can go through and I can grab, 10 knobs in a few seconds, and it's just so much easier and quicker and more of a musical experience for me working on that than sitting in front of a screen with a mouse. And I've tried some control surfaces, and I've never found anything that really works that well. I could be wrong, but that's just my opinion, and I'm sticking to it until somebody shows me something different. Let's see. Oh, can you tell me this is from Sinai Jimenez. Can you tell me your opinion about Dyno Audio BM15s? Yeah, well, you could probably see them there. There's one. and I really like them. They're great. They're for larger, sort of in between small bookshelves and the large and like soffit mounted speakers. They go pretty loud and they have plenty of bottom end, and they're not hypey at all, which is nice. Compared to like a Genelec or something like that, which just you put up a Genelec and immediately everything sounds great. You go, wow, excuse me, I don't have to do anything. Well, these things still make me work, so they don't sound immediately good. I have to make them sound good, and I think that's important. That's the whole thing with the Yamaha NS10, was that they're terrible sounding speakers, but you can get them to sound pretty good. And if you can get something to sound good on those things, it sounds pretty great just about anywhere. And the BM15s, the BM15As they're similar to that, except they actually do sound good and they're pleasant to listen to. I mean, I still I have these little Yamahas there that I switch back and forth because I like to have a smaller speaker too. The other thing that I really like, which you'll never be able to find, I'm sure, is see that TV up there? It's got actually my next door, the guy that lives across the street who actually passed away a few years ago, he gave that to me as a Christmas present. And at the time my monitor had died. I had a professional Sony CRT monitor, and I put that up there instead. And then I used to use these little Apple computer speakers for another reference, and they all died. And so I thought, well, geez, there's some speakers up there. There's 2 stereo speakers. And so I just plugged into that, and that actually is really, I listen to that all the time. It's great. It's not very loud, but if everything cuts through on that, I think it's a pretty good reference. So I don't know if you can find a TV like that. It's a standard resolution, really old Sharp. Good luck. I mean, I don't know. It's just I'm not giving anybody advice as to what kind. I will never advise anybody as to what type of speakers, because everybody hears differently. Okay, and I thought I said something back in the 80s in a magazine article about the Yamahas, just because that's what I was using. That's all I had at the time. And that everybody went out and bought them and put tissue paper over the tweeters and blamed me. Well, don't blame me, pal. You know what I mean? It's like use whatever you want, but don't take my advice. Let me see. Here's something from Ivan. Hello, Bob. When drum tracks have some phase issues, how do you deal with them? Flip the phase button. Pretty simple. Do you move the clip in the DAW? Use samples or milliseconds moves? I'll do that for bass. If there's a bass DI and direct, a bass DI and a mic, like an amp is mic'd. Usually for some reason the route through the amp tends to delay the signal a little bit, and so I'll just move the amp a little ahead to match the DI, and that kind of evens out the bass, so you don't get kind of hot spots in the frequency spectrum. But I don't do it with drums. I just use the phase buttons to see what sounds best. Tin drum. Everything goes the same basic verbs to gel things together, or everything gets its own separate verb delay to put it in its own space. P.S. You rock. Oh, thank you. That's a good question. Actually, I usually end up with what I call a reverb cocktail, sort of. I mean, sometimes it's just one reverb on an instrument. Sometimes I'll have 3 or 4 different reverbs on a voice or a particular instrument. I'll have maybe a real, like my live chambers here are really short. You can get them on Altiverb, or you can get them in the Clearmountain's domain plugin. And it's a real short, bright, kind of like a Motown type reverb. And then I'll usually have a middle of the road kind of, it's almost like a plate, but it's one of the Altiverb things. and then I'll have a really long sort of. There's this thing in Altiverb called St. Joseph's Church, which is a magnificent, beautiful, huge sounding thing, which I don't use very much, only on the big ballads and things like that. And then the Apogee Studio, which is like a really dark, warm ambience, and it's not even reverb really. It's really an ambience, and that just adds a little real. Sometimes just that it will it'll be like a dry vocal, but instead of totally dry, it just sounds like it's in some kind of a little bit of a space, and it's really nice to just give a little bit of depth to the vocal or the instrument. There was one of the other questions about depth, and so much of it is those different types of reverbs, and where you put them. Well, I usually like to have the vocal in front of the band, so I use less reverb or a shorter reverb, and then the band will have maybe a bit more of a reverb, just to set them back a little bit. And then that all depends on the song. There isn't any one thing I would always do for everything. It's just you kind of have to let the piece of music guide you as to what the environment should be. Let's see. Do you have any parallel processing for drums, for example? This comes from Ira Becker. So easy to pronounce your name compared to some of the others. Just snare drum. I mean, I played with parallel processing. A lot of guys and girls do, they'll send the drums to buses and then bring them back on a pair of faders and compress that. And it just, I always feel like it's a little out of control for me, that I can't really control what's going on when I'm doing that. And I'm not saying I think that's probably a great thing to do. And not only that, but it affects the cymbals in a way that I usually don't really like. And so, but I do it on snare drum. I usually have parallel. I'll mult the snare drum to two channels. One channel will have my EQP 1A3 that's broken. And let me see, I use an 1178 compressor, one side of the 1178. See the compressor first, and then the EQ. So that'll be one channel, and the other channel won't have anything. It will just be the EQ on the console. And then I'll actually EQ them both on the SSL, and I'll mix them together, and I'll play with that balance until it sounds like what I want, And that'll change sometimes during the song. Sometimes I'll actually turn the EQ'd compressed channel off during a verse and turn it on during a chorus. Or if it's a cross stick, I might change that. I'll turn the EQ'd one off and crank up the not affected one. Or sometimes I'll just mult it and bring that up on another channel altogether if it's a side stick, because sometimes you just want to EQ that totally differently and put maybe even a different reverb on it. But that's kind of all I do for parallel compression. Let me see. Hang on. A little confusing here. Do you have a regular routine when mixing a song? A regular routine? Well, I start around between 10 and 11 in the morning and mix for a while. Usually take a 15-minute nap at some point in the afternoon because I get kind of sleepy. And then, until about dinner time, 7 o'clock, and that's it. I used to mix after dinner and continue. And then my wife once finally said, "Why are you doing this? Do you have to do that? Do you have to mix all night?" And I realized, wow, I really don't, and so now I just stop. And it's up about 6, 7 o'clock when she comes home, and then we hang out and have dinner. Let's see. George Michael? No, it can't be really. Yeah. Okay. Hi, thank you for doing this. It seems like you're not using NS10s anymore and using MSP7s instead. Could you tell us about what is the thing that you like about the MSP7s, and why did you stop using the NS10s? Oh no, that's top secret. You're not supposed to see those. Not really. It's just one of those things. I've been using those silly NS10s forever. A lot of stories about me in the NS10s, and I thought, okay, well, it's time to change. Chris Lord-Alge comes out with his version of the NS10, and I thought, all right, well, now it's Chris's speaker. He's kind of taken over for that one, and now I'm on to something else. But anyway, Apogee and I were thinking of doing our own speaker at some point a few years ago, and we were thinking of doing it with Yamaha, and Yamaha was a little bit interested. They said, oh yeah, that might be a good idea. So they sent us over some of the speakers that they already had in production, and that was one pair. They sent us a couple other ones too, and they sat under my console for about a year because I was so busy that I never had a chance to put them up. Excuse me, I got this morning phlegm. And there was one day last summer when I wasn't that busy. I didn't really have that much to do. And I think I was working on a mix for a friend or something like that. And I said, oh, well, what's going on with these speakers? Let me take them out of the box. And I put them up. And I said, whoa, these actually sound pretty good. And they got a bunch of switches and knobs on the back. And I messed around with them for a few hours. And just kept A-Bing them to the NS10s and to the Dynes. And I said, well, these actually sound pretty good. So I tried a few mixes with them, and they seemed to work out. And not only that, but they sounded better. They kind of did the same thing that the NS10s did, but they were more pleasant to listen to. They weren't as harsh, and they had a little bit more bottom end. They didn't quite have that bump at 120, which made the snare drum sound better than it really sounds. So I said, well, I'll just start using these. Of course, they stopped making them years ago, and unfortunately, so you can't really get. I mean, you might be able to get them used, but and it's too bad that they don't make them anymore. But in fact, this is the only pair I have, and I hope they hold up. The tweeter on the left side is bent a little bit, so somebody must have hit it at some point. Sorry, it's getting kind of warm in here. I got a light pointing right in my face. That's my grumpy T-shirt from Disneyland. I'm a big Disneyland fan. For what do you use those Pultecs? Well, let me see. The top two are quite often on piano with an SSL compressor. I have a rack-mounted SSL compressor, a Logic Effects compressor. The next two, I use them quite often on guitars. The bottom one, like I said, snare drum. They just sound good on pretty much anything. I mean, they're very, very broad. They're not really... they're much different than the SSL. The SSL are great for carving out frequencies. You know, they can get real specific about frequencies. The Pultecs are more sort of general, or just make something brighter or something warmer on the bottom or things like that. And that's kind of how I use them. From Milterson, what's the best piece of advice you ever had in regards to mixing? The best piece of advice you ever had. In other words, that anyone gave me. Oh yeah, well, from Bruce Springsteen. His thing was like the most important thing in a song like one of his. Let's say not. This probably wouldn't apply to some things. But for music like his, is the link. Let me see, the connection between the character of the song, not necessarily the singer, but who the singer is portraying, right? The narrative of the song and the listener, and there can't ever be anything can't ever come between those two things. That link is the most important thing. That the listener has to be in tune with that and feel what that person feels, right? And like I say, it's the singer, but it's not actually the singer. It's who he's portraying. It's the character that he or she is portraying, and hopefully that the singer is doing a good job of that to start with. And if they are, you just want to make sure that nothing's getting in the way of that. That all the instruments need to enhance that and complement it, but not obscure it. And so that's the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, because that's something I always think about when I'm mixing pop songs or anything with a vocal. And even I mix a lot of French and Spanish language things, and I don't speak French or Spanish, unfortunately, which is really a shame for me, I think. But you kind of get the feeling as to I got a little message about we're almost over, but I'm going to keep going for a bit, okay, because it's fun. Excuse me. I forgot what I was saying. But anyway, yeah. So that's the thing, I think. Are your ceiling diffusers? This is Daniel Martinez. Are you ceiling diffusers tuned to a specific frequency range, or are they just size matched wood pieces? No, it's all tuned. My architect, a guy named Brett Taney, he's got a company called Bodo Design. He did the room. I laid it out. I said, this is where I want everything. This is where I want the console. This is where I want the couch. This is where I want the racks, and now make it sound good and make it look nice. And so it's a square room, which is the worst thing for a control room, of course. A low ceiling, it's an 8-foot ceiling, which isn't good either. Luckily, it's large enough. But so he designed all this diffusion, but it's all calculated for the room, because there would normally be standing waves between the flat floor and the flat ceiling, the two concrete walls that are parallel. So he's got diffusers all over the walls there, and those he didn't make those, but he had them made. His company actually made these ones up there, and they're actually sunk into the ceiling joists, and so they go right up to the living room floor up there, and so they make a huge difference. I mean, this room would be unusable without all of that. The other thing that's cool about this room is that I have very little problems with bass buildup, and a lot of it's because if you could sit in the living room upstairs, the bass just comes right through, and so all that bass energy, instead of getting trapped in the room, is going right through the ceiling. And that's something that my ex-boss Tony Bon Jovi at Power Station was very smart about. He taught me a lot about that stuff. That Studio A, the control for Studio A at Power Station is basically a box with just stud and drywall walls, and the bass goes through. The bass goes through into the shop behind it, and so we never had a problem there with bass buildup. And it's something that a lot of studio designers don't understand, and it always amazes me. They'll build a concrete bunker and then build these enormous bass traps to have to now get rid of that bass that's stuck in the room because the bass isn't going through the walls. And then it makes the control room like half the size it could be, which is just silly, Use have a machine room or a tape library or a closet or something, and use that as the bass trap. But anyway, so getting off the which converter do you prefer to print your final mix? Well, Apogee, of course. I have 4 Symphony IOs, and 3 of them are on my multi-track. I have 2 rigs, one there and one here. You can't see them, but the 2 screens are here. The machines are over in the machine room. But so I have 3 Symphony IOs on the multi-track rig, and one on the print rig. And the print rig is it's just a 16-channel box. It was 8-channel for years because I mix stereo and surround at the same time, so I'm always printing 8 channels, stereo and 5.1. But then I had to do something that was going to be the Springsteen movie was going to be mixed in Atmos, so I added 8 more channels to it so that I could give them separate effect stems. The distorted Pultec would be a great plugin. Read that, mix this. Okay. Hi, Bob. Can you give some ear training techniques that we should practice? Nope. No, I don't. It's a good question, though. But it's just a matter of taste, really. It's not. I don't think my ears are any better than anybody else's. In fact, they're probably not as good as. I know my ears aren't as good as Lucas Vandermeer, who designs all the analog circuitry for the Apogee gear. He hears things that I can't hear. So it's more about taste and about what I've learned over the years about what people like and what works and what doesn't, what people like, what people don't like. A lot of it's for me is getting into the heads of, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I mean it in a positive way, in the heads of the artist and the producer that I'm working with, and trying to figure out what they're looking for and what they want to get out of the particular piece of music, and I try to think like they do, not like me, and adding whatever I know to be able to get that end of the people that I'm working with. You're welcome, David Stedman. He's just saying thank you. Just nice. Let me see. No. Okay, what does your male vocal chain generally look like? You go. This is from Chexrl. CHXRL. You go to Foundation to getting a standard vocal. Your go-to foundation for getting a standard vocal. Nothing special. I'll tell you what. I have two. I'm either going through an LA3A or one of the half of an 1178, which is basically an 1176. And I use the EQ on the SSL. Usually add a little top end, do a little high pass filter. Sometimes add or dip some mid range. Sometimes I have to dip some 4 or 5K. I don't know. If it's harsh, I use the BSS sometimes, more on female vocalists, but sometimes male vocalists. In fact, I've been using it on Stevie Van Zandt because he's got a little kind of a harshness in his voice when he's singing live. Plus, he's singing on I think he's singing on an SM58, which can be a little bit harsh in the middle, and I can dip it a little of that out. Somebody named Resonance. Could you talk about INXS's new? Oh no, we did that already. Thank you. This is from Mohit. Thank you so much, Bob. And you didn't butcher my name. Good, thanks. Where are we? Is that the same questions? I hope you don't mind if I go a little longer. Is that okay? Here's something from T. Henter. Come talk to me. What are all those wonderful sounds? How many tracks are there? You know what? That was a really long time ago, and I barely remember it. It was just such a nice thing to do something for Peter, because he's a bit of a friend. He actually stayed in my house in Woodstock one time. But it was it was just an honor to be able to mix anything for him, because I'm just such a huge fan. And I don't know what all those. You'd have to ask Peter what those sounds were, because I don't really know. It was a beautiful record, though. What's that classic cymbal mine snare effects? Greetings from Germany. Um, Cymbal mine, yeah. Well, we used samples back then. That was a new thing back then, and so yeah, let's do it. And in the '80s, the thing about the '80s was, okay, who's got the biggest snare drum? I know it's stupid. It sounds really stupid now, but that was kind of the thing. And, we were all focused on the snare drum. I'm glad that's pretty much over with. But, yeah, I had some sort of sound, like on, what's the name of that song? I don't know. Whatever it was, yeah, we used samples. I mean, a lot of that was recorded. They were recorded in two amazing studios, which don't exist anymore. And one of them was the Townhouse in London, with that drum room that Phil Collins and my friend Hugh Padgham made famous, with the great Phil Collins wacky drum sound. And it was a talkback mic apparently or the listen mic that he had wired in a listen mic so he could record on it. And I didn't use the listen mic, but I just used some room mics. And then Bearsville, Studio A at Bearsville, which is an enormous room and just incredible sounding room, which is so yeah, that was Mel Gaynor in that room. In fact, there's a great little story watching. We set the drums up right next to the window, next to the control room window, and we were doing a take. And in the middle of the take, he's playing, and he actually put one stick down, and he had a beer, I think, and he reached down and took a sip of the beer and kept playing with the other hand, and you couldn't tell. And then he looked back in the control room and looked at me and laughed. But anyway, I thought that was a funny story. I wish there was somebody here to laugh or something, because I'm just, I feel like I'm amusing myself. Here's from David Stogel. Do you change the settings on your bus compressor, or do they stay the same? How hard do you hit it? Are there particular settings you gravitate towards? Let me see. I usually keep it on, I don't even know. It's 1 millisecond attack time, 300 milliseconds release time, and excuse me, either 2 to 1 or 4 to 1. Usually 2 to 1 for the ballads and the more sensitive numbers, and then 4 to 1 for the ones where I really want to hear it pump a little bit. Live stuff usually 4 to 1. And that's about it. There's a little mod on there to get the gain structure better. The stock version was a little bit, I don't know, it's not right. I can't remember what was wrong with it, but there's a lot of mods on that thing over the years. I mean, there were a lot of factory mods, and then I've done a lot of mods to it over the years. And let's see if there's anything. Okay, wait a minute. No, I didn't answer that. Yeah, that's a bit it. Any mixed translation tips? No, wait. Oh, I see. Alex Kinch. What was going through your mind when Bowie came back in the mixed room to hear what you did on Let's Dance? Before you pushed play, did you say anything to him? Yeah, I said, yeah, you better like this, man, or you're fired. No, I definitely didn't say that. I usually don't say anything. I just play it and see what they say. It's a lot more interesting as to what the client has to say than what I have to say. And let's see. Meaning specifically the song Let's Dance. Yeah, no, we had figured out that crazy delay. I mean, you probably know that story. I don't know where Nile Rodgers played guitar and he played rhythm guitar on the track, and he just played the simple dun 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 dun, and he said, could you just stick a slap or something on that guitar to make it a little more interesting, because it's kind of boring when I'm playing. Okay, and so we had these tape delays at the time. It was a Studer B67 at Power Station that we always used. And the thing about using tape is that it's not immediately in time. The timing is just the distance between the two heads, the record and the play head, and whether it's at 7.5 or 15 IPS, or if you're vary speeding it. And it's not obviously set to any BPMs of the track, and so I just put it up. I think it was set to 7.5 as a slow, was a longer delay, and it was a stereo thing going. So it was ping ponging back and forth, which is something that I always would do. I still do, and so it was feeding into one side, but the returns on the console were really loud, and they were sending obviously back into the delay on the opposite side to make the ping pong thing. But I had the faders too loud, so it was just like massive. It was just way overpowering to me, and so I immediately jumped out. I said, "Oh, just let me fix that. Let me get this in time." And David and Niall both stood up immediately and said, "No, it's exactly right, just like that. Don't touch it." So what I thought was a mistake, I thought I'd really screwed up. They thought it was amazing. So it's interesting how those things happen. That was great. And but as far as when they came in, it's amazing what he let me get away with. There's that crazy little snare drum that goes back and forth or the delay on the snare drum that happens occasionally. There's a gated plate on the horns, and I just there was so much space in that record that I just kind of went nuts and did all these different effects, and I figured, well, I'll try whatever, and if there's something he doesn't like, we just get rid of it. And they just liked everything I did, which is really kind of cool, And they were like, yeah, that sounds great. I don't remember them having any. They might have had some comments. I don't know. You'd have to ask Niall. He might remember. I don't remember. Unfortunately, we can't ask David. I wish we could. I miss him dearly. He was just a great guy. He was really wonderful to work with, and probably the best singer don't tell Mick and Bruce, but he was probably the best singer I've ever worked with. He was amazing. Because the thing about him is another little story. I hope I'm not going too long. Just tell me if I should stop. But when we did the song Modern Love, he came in to sing it, and he sang it in that real deep Anthony Newley voice, that he had on some songs. And he sang a verse and a chorus, and then he stopped. He's out in the studio, and he stopped me. I was the only one in the control room. Niall wasn't there. And he goes, "Okay, play that back." So I played it back, and then at the end of what he sang, he said, "Okay, hang on." And he stood there and thought for a minute. He goes, "Let me think. Okay, yeah, let's do it again." And so I went back and punched it again. And then he sang it up the octave, which is what you hear on the record, on the song Modern Love. That's loud, sort of shouty kind of voice. I had to adjust the preamp on the mic. And then he said, "Okay, let's hear that back." And he played it back. We played it back. And then he stopped at the end of the first chorus. He said, "Great, you should just drop it in from there." Dropped in there, finished it, doubled it. That was it. That was the vocal. And the thing that was remarkable about it was that between the first time he sang it and the second time, it was like somebody else walked into the control room. It's like a whole different character, a different person lived in that song, like that first Anthony Newley guy was like, I guess David listened to it and said, "Nah, he doesn't really live here. Okay, let's see if this other guy lives there." And that was what we ended up with. It was just amazing. Okay, well, I think that's about it. I think I'm way over. Yeah, way over now. And
hi, Bob. That was really amazing. Thank you very much for doing this.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you.
This is fun.
Thank you for doing this and for answering so many questions. Thank you.
Okay. Hope it sounded good. I'm using an Apogee hype mic. You should all know, and that's if my voice sounds good, that's why.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you so much for doing this. And thank
Okay.
you
You're
everyone for
welcome.
tuning in today.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for the great questions. Really good questions. Really fun.
Thank you.
Do I have to press?